Welcome back to Choices Were Made. Today we're joined by licensed therapist Jennifer Lord, LMFT. Jennifer has been in practice since 2011 and grew up right here in the Bay Area. She began her career focusing on children and adolescents and now works with middle-aged men, navigating parenthood and building deeper connections in relationships while also supporting couples, families, and co-parents. She is an advocate for women's rights, postpartum mental health, and broader access to mental health care. With a foundation in attachment theory and an adaptive therapeutic style, Jennifer brings compassion, insight, and real-world wisdom to the conversation around mental health. Let's get into today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. I am personally very, very, very excited
Yeah, me
to talk
too.
to
This
you.
is amazing.
Well, I appreciate you guys inviting me to be here.
So just going into a little bit of your background, what first drew you to becoming a therapist?
Actually, I knew I always wanted to help people, and it wasn't therapy that I originally started out as. Growing up, I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician. I always wanted to work with kids. I always knew I wanted to be in some kind of helping profession. And it wasn't until I got to college and I really got into psychology and I was like, this is pretty cool stuff. I think I'm pretty interested in this a lot more than the biological part of things.
When you were first coming up, thinking about therapy and thinking about becoming a therapist, what was your family's reaction?
My family was super supportive. I joke with people all the time that I was always like the person to help people solve their problems or talk things out or like be the go-between between friends, and like the neighborhood kids would come to me with their drama and like how to work things out. So I don't think anybody was surprised when this was the path that I took. Everybody's been pretty supportive in
Did
my whole
you
life.
do you grow up around like a knowledge of mental health? Like, was that something you talked about like in your family?
That actually was kind of. My family was open about mental health and mental health struggles. Like they didn't hide like family members' struggles and things like that, but it wasn't something that I knew was accessible to most people. So like we would talk about different people's struggles, but I didn't know what resources were out there until I got older and kind of started to learn what the avenue of psychology could open up to.
Yeah. And when you were first starting out, when you were first, sitting in the chair, talking to people, did you feel like that's exactly where you were supposed to be? Or were you nervous? Were you excited?
I was terrified, and I was probably terrified for years to come. I remember the first day I went to the middle school. So I worked in a community counseling center when I first started out, and that was scary. And one-on-one is like a whole different vibe. But then I went to the middle school, and my very first day, my very first client, I had to make a CPS report, and I was like, I don't know if
my
I can
gosh,
do this. This is a lot of
Wow.
responsibility for me.
Yeah.
So it really
That is
kind of
so
freaked me
scary.
out. It was intense. And I was like,
Well,
okay, but that sold me though, because I was like, oh my gosh, there are so many kids who need an advocate, who need a voice,
Yeah.
who need a safe place to go to. So it was scary being like a first time, but it really reinforced like, no, this is the population I want to be with.
Well, middle
interesting. I
school
know.
age is scary age, right?
Yeah,
Would you
that's
say that?
scary.
It's a scary age.
They're an interesting transition. I know a lot of people have weird feelings about middle school because they're just like that little kid growing out of elementary school phase, but
Yeah.
before high school. But big stuff comes up in those years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know for me, I used to work at a bilingual learning center, and the middle schoolers, those are my hardest kids. Those, I would say, they're the ones that challenged me the most, but really made me think and really made me reflect on, because they would ask me so many questions and I was just like, I don't know how to answer you. I don't know how to answer your questions. And I know now, looking at placement sites for my master's program, I definitely at the beginning completely crossed out kids. I was like, I don't want to work with kids. I feel like it's so much responsibility. It's for especially a lot of kids. You're the first person that really makes them feel loved and seen and understood. And I feel like it's so much responsibility separating the therapist from, oh my gosh, I just want to give you a hug and I just want to be there for you. Did you ever find that hard in your work with middle schoolers?
I adore all of my clients, but especially like there are kids who that they want a hug. They'll come to you and
Yeah.
say like, I just wish my dad would ask me how my day was, or
Oh.
I just wish my parents worked less and actually like, talked to me. Like I have teenagers who are like, I wish my parents asked me about my day, like actually cared
Yeah.
enough to ask me about my day. And so those are the ones that definitely like you feel that attachment style of like you're kind of a replacement parent sometimes, where you're kind of
Yeah.
fulfilling that need and that safe space for them because they might not get it at home. But that's honestly what keeps me working with kids, is knowing that it can make such a substantial difference in a kid's growing phase, right? And I've had
Mhm.
them come back 10 years later or whatever and be like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god, you were so instrumental in my
Yeah.
teenage years." And it's those moments we don't always get them, right? Like, they come into
Mhm.
our room, we do the work, then they go off into the world, and hopefully we don't hear from them again, right? So usually if we hear from them, it's because it's not so good. But sometimes they do come back and they tell me, or they'll send me a message and be like, "I'm doing great," or "I'm
Mhm.
thriving." And those moments are amazing.
How do you deal with that, like because I was in therapy for a long time as a teenager, and
Mhm.
I think what I talked about is the hardest part was going to therapy and doing all this work, but then going home and my life being the same because I am young and I don't have control over my environment, and so, like, how do you help kids through that?
Well, I think that is the toughest part too, right? Is also just recognizing that not everybody has options to get out, right? Because, like,
Yeah.
as an adult, and some adults don't even have options to get out, but, like, as
Mm.
an adult, you have much more options about money and autonomy over yourself and legal stuff, right? But kids, yeah, that's probably the hardest work is when you know that they're in an environment that's either unhealthy or questionably unsafe, and there's only so much you can do, and then you have
Yeah.
to send them back there, but knowing that you can still be a safe place to teach them skills, to help them build their self-esteem, right? So, like, despite going home to whatever you're going to, we can still always work on how do we build you up to be resilient and to
Mm.
survive these things, and then making
Yeah.
that exit plan, right? Like, what are we looking forward to? How are we going to get out? What resources do you have?
Yeah. I know you do family therapy as well.
Mhm.
And what would you say is the hardest part about doing family therapy?
I think family therapy and even couples therapy is actually a bit more dynamic and straightforward than more of like the processing space that
Mm.
you usually offer individuals, right? Because, like, when an individual comes in and you want to kind of build that rapport in that relationship, you want them to trust you so that when you
Mhm.
share information with them or you say, "Hey, have you thought about this?" and they really believe what you have to say and they're like, "Okay, I trust that, generally has my best interests at heart." Like, I believe what she has to say. With couples, they come in and they just start going at it, and you're like, "Nah, stop. You can't do that. You can't do that. What are we doing here?" Right? Family work, I think, can be a bit more touching. You'd be surprised how many dads come in, and the second they sit down on my couch, just start crying. Words
Mm.
aren't even said yet. The
Yeah.
session hasn't even started. They just sit down and it is,
Yeah.
people just want that space to just be open, and sometimes they don't allow themselves that space
Mhm.
outside of my room, but it is truly amazing sometimes when you can just see, like, people just open up and share things that they would never share unless they were in my room.
Yeah, that's so interesting because recently I had an assignment where we had to write about like our bias or something that if it were to happen in session, it would make us uncomfortable. And I actually wrote about that. I grew up around men that never showed emotion and never talked about anything, never cried, never said anything related to how they feel. So I said, honestly, if I were to have a male client, it would be very uncomfortable for me to see them show emotion because I just never grew up with it. Would you say that that's something that you experience?
I definitely tell people to cry all the time, and I have even been caught up in emotion, right? And and I work with lots of clients on creating that space to cry because so many clients do grow up feeling like they're not allowed to show that emotion or
Mhm.
that's weakness, right? But when you're really doing the work, when you're really sitting in your feelings, when you're allowing yourself the depths of all that you're experiencing, a lot of times your body does react, even when you don't want it to in front of a stranger or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so people cry all the time, and I'm unbelievably comfortable with crying. Like, I myself will cry when I have big emotions. Out in the real world, I cry all the time. I got no problems with it. So I welcome all of my clients, and they're always the first reaction is always sorry. And all of them will
Yeah.
tell you, I'm like, don't say sorry. Never say sorry for having feelings in my room, right? If you're gonna express yourself, express yourself. This is the one space you get to be yourself without judgment.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so funny hearing as a therapist at the beginning that you were so scared and terrified. And as a client, I know that when I started with my current therapist, I was terrified. I was like, oh my gosh. It's so funny because I think, oh, is she going to like me? Are we going to get along? How am I going to trust her with all my secrets? But in reality, you don't know if the therapist is thinking the same thing. Like, are they going to open up? Are they going to like me? Are they going to accept me? So I know that you went from community mental health to private practice. Is that something that you noticed a really big shift in for example, like the communities that you worked with, the kind of work that you were doing, or was building rapport really different with clients?
Well, what was really cool is the community that I was working in kind of fed into building my private practice. And some of
Mm,
the clientele did shift a little bit. I was doing much more of like the victims of crime and supporting lower income community. And I still did continue to do that into my private practice. Like I always thought it was important to keep some amount of my practice open for like a sliding fee scale and to be able to really give back to the community. But I mean, started out my community help in the
mm.
middle schools, and then I came back to where I'm from and then really started to build up there because I figured that was gonna be the easiest place to maintain my name and my business because it's really hard to advertise as a therapist. It's not like you can get all your clients to be like 5 stars, right?
To
Because of the
give you a review, yeah.
confidentiality.
Yeah,
So,
that's so
it's
true.
really challenging to build your name, and so I was like, "Okay, well, this is where I'm from, this is where I know people, this is where I can build connections easily." So, I moved back and worked at the community counseling center there. Other than taking on, like, the Veterans Affairs clients, that was really the only big shift that I did once getting into the private practice.
Yeah, tell us about these organizations. I've never heard of them. You said victims of crimes and with
Yes,
veterans?
yes. So, Victims of Crime is a program put on by the state where they will help support those who have been victims of crime. I usually worked with the children who went through some kind of traumatic
Mm,
event or situation that the state is paying for their therapy to help them process what that situation was. And then the Veterans Affairs, so I partner, usually I get my referrals out of the VA in Palo Alto mental health services. So they do offer their own mental health services, but they only have so many to really work with. And so not every person clicks with every person. And so that it's nice to have an outside set of people that they can also refer to see if that's would click a little bit better with somebody else that's not just directly in their system.
Yeah, it's so important,
awesome.
I think, to find a therapist that not just any therapist, but someone who you feel like can understand you and what you're going through. Because, like, when I was going to therapists, like, it just felt like it was just talking back and forth. And I was like, this person does not understand what I'm going through, which just made me feel more alone and more like no one will ever understand me. No one will ever be able to
Yeah.
help me. So I feel like something that I've seen a lot more open up is like, going to different therapists and trying them out and seeing if they're the right fit and like not feeling bad about being like, hey, we just aren't the right fit. And maybe I'm going to go find someone else.
Absolutely, that's what I tell people whenever they come in, so I always offer a consultation session for a little bit less than my normal price, and I'm like, "Just try it out. Try out as many therapists as you want," right? Like,
Mhm.
it's like dating, you wanna make sure you click, you're gonna be opening up to this person and being really vulnerable, right? So you don't wanna just take the first person that you meet just because that's the first person who answered the phone. So it really should
Yeah.
be somebody that you feel comfortable with and like their style, right? There's some people who want a very directive, homework based approach. There's other people who want a safe space where they can just come and sit and cry and talk about their feelings and not feel judged, right? And so I think it really is finding what feels right to you for your own process.
Just trying to push like someone into taking that leap to go to therapy. What would you say like would be kind of something to give them a little nudge, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't need to go to therapy. I have my girlfriends, I have my sisters, like me, I have a lot of sisters. So what would you say to someone who to kind of differentiate, maybe we do need to go to therapy instead of kind of like opening up to someone maybe in our family or our girlfriends or something?
Well, I think it's great if you already have the skills to open up and start to share your feelings, right? But whenever we share our feelings with people in our personal life, we have to be careful what we say, who we say what to, how much we say of it, right? And do we really want to say everything we're thinking? And so being able to go to a therapist, a neutral third party, and like I explained to everybody, who's legally bound to not share your secrets,
Yeah.
right? You can go in there and say any and everything about any person in your life, but also they can help you identify areas you're struggling in or things you can be working on, different skills you could be trying to use, right? So there is an element of processing, but there is also this part of trying to help you work through whatever the situation is or whatever you're struggling with too, in a way that maybe not everybody in your life has those skills.
How would you say you approach therapy? Are you more like homework, direct? Are you more just offering a safe space?
Well, there's a reason I didn't become a teacher. I don't want to do homework. Yes, if there are clients who have things that they really wanna work on, or I think, like, they're struggling with OCD type thoughts, right? And we could talk about what that structure looks like, but going home and actually implementing those things and trying those things out, yes, then we'll talk about what that homework could look like. but I'm not going to give you a worksheet. There are definite theories that give you worksheets to work on all the time. That
Yeah.
is not my style. I'm also not the therapist who's going to sit there and stare at you for 30 minutes. I know that's a thing, right? Let there be silence. And I absolutely do let there be silence, but not when it comes to teenagers, kiddos, anxious adults.
Yeah.
Nobody wants
Yeah.
you to sit there and stare at them.
Yeah, no,
So
that doesn't feel good.
absolutely. So I feel like if you can build that rapport and that relationship, they will open up with you eventually, as long as you're not taking up all the space all the time.
Yeah. How do you, for example, a client that you feel is not opening up or not really pushing themselves to do the work, what are some tactics that you do in therapy to kind of make them feel safer or, just push them to think a little bit more about what's going on?
Well, I think the hardest thing that people struggle with is addressing it head on, right? So
Yeah.
we've been doing this for a while, or we've been talking about the same thing for a while, and it doesn't feel like we're getting to your goals, or how are you feeling about the situation, right? And some clients just want that space or need that time to work through things. Like I've had clients who take a long time before they're ready to take those steps or ready, they'll come in and they'll say the right things, but they're just not there yet. But I think having that open dialogue so everybody is on the same page, right? And
Yeah.
feels like they have a say in their therapy. Like, yeah, I am feeling kind of stuck, or I'm not sure. Or I've asked clients, like, sometimes I'll say something that could bother them or upset them. And I'll be like, tell me, like, did I mess that up? Do we need to build this relationship? Do I need to earn your trust again? Do you want to see somebody else, right? Like, did I cross a line and now you want to see somebody else, right? But I think no
Mhm.
matter what, it's unlike a friendship where you have to like tiptoe and be kind of careful about things. Like, if you see something, you got to call it out. Like, ooh, you made a face when I said that. Are you okay with what I just said? Does that upset you, right?
Yeah, I know for me in therapy, my past therapists have been very, like Evelyn said, I had one therapist who I would just go in and talk and cry, and she'd be like, "That sounds like a lot." And that's all she would say. Like, I would be sitting there for 15 minutes just sobbing, and she would just say, "Yeah, that sounds hard." And I would just be so mad. I'd be like, "Well, that didn't help." And now this therapist that I have, I'll say something. For example, I would tell her, about difficult family dynamics. And I'm a person who I have a lot of trouble with confrontation. I don't like having difficult conversations. We never grew up having difficult conversations. So as an adult, I would lean away from that. And she would always say, "Well, what's the worst that could happen?" And I'd be like, "Well, you're right. I'm not going to die, but I just don't want to do it." And I know for me, like that little shift of just pushing me a little bit to think outside of what my brain thinks is, oh, if I say something, I'm going to explode. But in reality, just that reframing of, well, honestly, yeah, it's going to be hard, but you're not going to die. Like it's just a conversation that you're going to have. So I think viewing therapy as kind of like someone that is going to push you just a little bit, but is not going to force you to do something. Because I think a lot of the time people are turned off to therapy because they're like, I don't want someone telling me what to do, or I don't want someone telling me how to live my life. But in reality,
Right.
therapists don't do that. Like they just push you to think about things in a different perspective.
Well, even to that
Yeah.
same vein, right? The flip side of, okay, so I'm gonna come in and you're gonna tell me how to live my life. And I'm like, I'm not a life coach. That's not what this is.
That's so funny seeing the other side.
That's why it's so important to have a therapist who, like, understands you and, like you said, you trust because it's like if like, I think I've had therapists in the past who are like, "Just stand up to your parents, just tell them what you think." I'm like, "That is not the culture that I live in, and I
Yeah.
can't do that because in my culture, that is just not acceptable." And so them telling me things that it's like, I'm never gonna be able to do that or implement that in my life. So it's like then you're kind of being given instructions that are even scarier than, something that's just not possible for your life, realistic.
Well, and I think that's even an important piece as you're like trying out therapists, right? Is we're not all from the same cultures or the same
Mhm.
families, and holding space for what somebody else's experience might be that's not yours.
Yeah. What are some typical misconceptions that you hear about therapy?
Okay. Well, for individuals, it would definitely be if I'm going to therapy, there's something seriously wrong with me. I hear
That's
that
a
one a
good one.
lot.
Yeah.
I have teens, young adults who are a little hesitant to come in because not everybody in their life is supportive of therapy. And so they'll, well, why are you going to therapy? You don't need therapy. You're not that screwed
Mhm.
up, right? And so, like, I think there's just a lot of reinforcing that if you go to therapy, there's something seriously wrong with you. I mean, even people will joke, right? Like somebody will tell them something messed up or something that's going on. They're like, "Oof, you need therapy," but like not in a
Yeah.
good way, not in a supportive way, in a like, "You're
Mhm.
screwed up. You need therapy." And then I think the other one that's really interesting is couples. Usually, when they come in for therapy, they feel like it's like the last ditch effort. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, by the time that they're getting to you, for some of them, it truly is. And they're already kind of on the way out. And so, couples therapy doesn't always work for couples. And I think that's why it gets a bad rap sometimes, because most people won't be pushed to that point until they're like, really like, that's it. There's nothing left. This relationship has been destroyed. I guess we can go to couples therapy. And there is no magic wand when it comes to that. So, if that's how you're coming in, you might not have great outcomes.
Yeah, and for couples, I've heard a lot that couples therapy is really difficult because for some people it's their first time ever being in therapy, so they have a lot of things they need to unpack, but in couples therapy that's really hard to do. And I'm curious, in your practice, do you have I know people have different setups of like, yeah, one week I'll see one person of the couple, one week I'll see the other, and then the next week I'll see the couple together. Do you have something like that at your practice?
Uh, I don't usually do that unless it's in the very beginning and they feel like there's history to be shared, but I'm pretty conscious about secrets with couples because usually if they're coming
Mm,
in, they have communication issues, and I'm not trying to add to that. And you're right. Honestly, it's usually for the man, and I'm not trying to be gender specific here, but a lot of times women may or may not have had an experience in therapy and they really want to go to couples therapy. And it's usually men who are a little bit more resistant to talk about that kind of stuff.
mhm.
So couples therapy quite often is the first step for men to have an introduction to therapy. And then once they're in there, they're like, okay, that's not as scary or as bad as I thought it was. But that's when usually we would make referrals for individual therapy if needed. If you get two people that are in there and you're like, ooh, this is coming up for you and this is coming up for you and this isn't the couple's work, right? Like really trying to hone in on like what's the couple and what's the individual stuff. And then
Mhm.
we just make referrals out for individual therapy as needed.
Would you say that working, because I know that right now your demographic has shifted, but in the past, what has been your favorite to work with? Individuals, couples, families?
Hmm. I love working with kids. Part of what I did through school was being part of an expressive arts camp and helping run that during the summer. And so I have always just found expressive arts to be beautiful and imaginative and amazing in the language of children. Play therapy is also great and fun and useful. And I do love play therapy, but just watching children create their stories, express their feelings, say the things that they can't put to words through art is something that is truly amazing to witness.
Why do you think you kind of shifted? Like, was it just the type of clients you started to get? It just organically went to that shift?
So, not a lot of people like to work with kids, and it's actually not even usually the kids that are the issue. It's most people struggle to work with kids because of the parents, which is
Mhm.
okay. Not everybody needs to work with kids. And dealing with challenging parents who want to control the situation can also be a little bit of a hard thing to get through. Once it seems so long ago now when you look at by numbers, but once the pandemic hit, everything really shifted in a lot of people's practices. A good majority of therapists moved away, started doing things only virtually, sold their
Mhm.
homes here and moved way further out than where they were, somewhere, that they could actually afford and did a lot of things virtually. I don't know when the last time you've looked for therapists were, but I've looked for therapists every so often to see where everybody's at. And a lot of them are all over California or willing to see people in California, but no in person stuff. So I think that shift has been hard.
Mhm.
I know for myself, it was a little bit more challenging to work with a younger population via the internet. I mean, we figured things out, we had some fun, but definitely doing things in person is much easier with kids. But the other interesting thing that happened in the pandemic is people spent a lot more time together than they ever had, right? People weren't going to the office, people weren't commuting, people were really changing their lives and realizing what was either important to them or the horrible person that they married that they were able to sustain because they weren't around them all the time. So I've actually seen a huge uptick in adults either trying to figure out who they are now, work life balance, how they don't want to be consumed by commuting, 2 hours a day and things like that, making time for their family, or yeah, relationships where their dynamics with their partner have shifted in a way that they didn't see coming and now they're not sure how to deal with it.
Yeah, the world has changed a lot for mental health. Like, I feel like just talking us, like, when I first started therapy, like, my parents would take me there and just say I was going to the doctor, and then nobody knew, what type of doctor. Like, is she dying or something? Why is she going to the doctor all the time?
Every week.
Every week, because nobody wanted to admit that I was, like, in therapy. And now, like, I feel like after the pandemic, coming into a world where there's so much information around mental health and therapy, and but it's hard also because I feel like we've also shifted into this world of like toxic positivity, and so that's been really hard to navigate, like, on the other side.
I know you had kinda brought that up before, and I was actually really curious. I know I was like, "You're asking me questions, but I kinda wanna ask you
Yeah,
questions
ask
as
away.
Yeah.
what you mean by the toxic positivity. Like, what is it that you're experiencing?"
I mean, for me personally, I think that it's like when, think bad things happen and people are like, oh, well, God has a plan, or, everything happens for a reason. And sometimes I'm kind of like, no, like I'm not really grateful for the bad things that happened to me in my life, because we had a guest on our very first guest who was just this young guy who was 18 years old. And he's like, yeah, like my parents were always there for me. They were super supportive, they're loving, nurturing, everything, right? And then it kind of puts me into, like, the mentality of, like, sometimes us, especially in our culture, it's like, "Oh, when you go through bad things, it builds character." It builds,
Mhm.
it builds
Yeah.
stamina, for you to be tolerant to the world. And so talking to that guy and being like, "Well, he's 18 years old, and I don't think he's ever been through one hardship in his life, and he seems like a really great guy." So I don't really think that the bad things, build character. I think you could be a pretty good person, grateful, good person, not going through bad things. So that's just, I don't know what you think.
I think those are, a lot of those sayings, right? Again, before the talking about mental health and everything was very much, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just
Mhm.
Yeah.
keep your head down and keep moving forward kind of mentality. I do think and I hope things continue to shift in this direction of like, sometimes I'll tell my clients like that just sucks and we're just going to sit in how
Yeah.
much that sucks, right? And a lot of growing, like I had a client last week, it was like, well, how do we heal like my past? Like how do we deal with my childhood? And I'm like, you gotta make space for it, and sometimes that's the hardest part, right? Is acknowledging like,
Mhm.
"Wow, like, I really was abused or neglected or mistreated as a child." And then what gets even harder to deal with is you acknowledge that as, like, a kid, but then let's say you have a decent relationship with your parents who are older and not terrible now, and then it's like, "Oh my god,
Mhm.
how do I make sense of the 2 things?" Right?
Yeah.
Like, this thing shaped who I am and continues to impact me to this day, but they're not the same people that they were. And I think
Yeah.
some of those pieces really come up for a lot of like adult clients. And as they start to have kids, of like, how do they make sense of the world and the relationships they usually have with their parents at this point?
Oh, that is so spot on to something that we talk about so much because now both of us have kids, and it's something that pushes you to really reflect on yourself and really reflect on these core components of who you are and things that you want to change. Like before I had my daughter, I had probably negative patience. Was no. Like if someone said something dumb to me, I would just sit there and be like, why are you even talking to me?
Your
Like
face
I would
said it all.
my face said it
It's
all. And sometimes my words would say it too. Like I was the most unpatient person now having a daughter, and I have to just breathe. Now I'm just like, okay, I gotta just chill for a second. Like now I cannot react the same way that I used to because now she's so innocent. She's only like 1 year old. So she doesn't know. Like she's just a baby. And now I'm really getting into that mentality of like, okay, I need to pause, breathe before I say anything, or else I'm gonna lose it. And it's really hard to get there. Like, it's so hard to get there because we grew up in an environment where any little thing was just a fight. And we grew up around zero patience. And now, as an adult, thinking, okay, by the time our mom was my age, she already had 2 kids. She was living in a country where she didn't speak the language, where she didn't have any family. She was just raising all of us kids. And by the time she was 32, she had 4 kids. And it was in a time when husbands didn't help at all. Like we push our husbands to pick up their slack. And that didn't exist back then. It was like the woman does everything. And now as an adult, I'm like, yeah, I would have been mad all the time too. If I had 4 kids having to clean the house, do the laundry, take them to school,
Mhm.
I was still, doing all of this extra stuff. I was like, yeah, I would have really been upset too as as a parent. But it's working through that. Now my parents aren't the same and they've changed so much, but I still hold on to all of those qualities that I learned when I was a kid. And it's something that's so difficult to work through.
Well, and even sometimes being a parent and having that connection with your child and looking at them and being like, how could anyone
Yes.
ever
Yeah.
do the things to a kid that happened to me, right? Right? And I think sometimes even sitting in that is kind of hard to make sense of, where you're like, you can have the compassion and you can recognize the situation that she was in and really care for her in that sense, but also really recognize like where little Miranda was at and how unfair that was
Yeah.
for little Miranda, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
feel
that
like in our
is
culture, it's so hard because it's like we've been met with a lot of walls that are like, well, that's the past, just let it go. Or, why are you still like hung up on that? Like, you're fine now. And it's like, no, I'm really not. Or it's like, yes, I'm fine, but I've been through so much therapy and so much work that I'm fine because I chose to be fine and because I chose to have a better life. Because, like we were talking about, when you least expect it, you're already like doing those things to your kids, right? Like I'm like yelling at them like, oh my gosh, I said I was never going to do that. And then here I am doing what I said I was never going to do.
And I
yes.
think that's where a lot of the way I view my clients comes from, right? Is like no matter what your life circumstances are, as you grow up, as you're little, as you're learning attachment and who you are in the world, your parents are reflecting that to you. They're reflecting love amongst each other and what a relationship looks like. They're reflecting it back to you, but also that's where you get your sense of self and how you connect to others. And so I always joke with people because whenever they come in and they're like, oh, I'm struggling with this, and I'm always like, it's mommy daddy issues. Like in the end, it always comes back to your parents because how you grow up and how you're raised really forms how you view the world. And sometimes,
Hmm.
if you want it to be different, it takes a lot of work and a lot of screwed up relationships or some bad experiences to really be like, I don't know if I want to keep repeating this pattern.
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
a dying question to ask you, and it's the
Okay.
perfect time. I have this, I guess, this difference of opinion of in social media, people talk so much about, like cutting people off and building up your
Mhm.
boundaries and like not letting anyone like intrude your boundaries and this and that. Evelyn and I have the most difficult time with boundaries because it's not part of our culture. It's not
Hmm.
part of our culture to have boundaries, and it's not part of even our family dynamic. It's not appropriate to have boundaries, and it's not appropriate to cut people off. So, for you as a therapist, how do you go about talking with clients about putting up boundaries when it's not accepted in the family, or even going as far
It's
as
not
just
realistic. It's just not
yeah, it's just not
realistic,
realistic and it's
honestly.
not sustainable. It's really not
Yeah.
sustainable because I know for us, putting up boundaries with people in our lives, it's so hard because we see them so often. It's like an every single week, multiple times a week. So how would you go about talking to a client about that?
Well, I think it kind of depends on what the boundary is, right? So, like,
Mhm.
let's say you're having an experience with your mom where she's always body shaming you. And you've worked really, really hard to get to a good place in your body and not putting, give into your eating disorders and not being that kind of stuff, right? And so, but every time you see her, she's always makes a comment about your body. And your boundary is, Mom, you got to stop talking about my body. Or I'm not going to come visit you anymore. Or we're going to take some space, right? Like, if you keep doing this, then I'm going to need a little space from you, right? And I think that's where it gets challenging to like start building up because some people don't want to cut their family off. And that's
Mhm.
totally acceptable. It's also okay if there's been a family member who has been nothing but horrible to you and doesn't bring anything to the table. And I don't mean like, like money or something, but like they don't make your life better. They stress you out. They maybe make you feel unsafe or make your family feel unsafe. Then it is 100% okay to value yourself in that time, right? And to really think about like, do I want to continue to put myself in a situation that may or may not be safe for me? And so I
Yeah.
think it's just figuring out the different layers of boundaries and like what's okay and what's not okay. But also, you might know that you have a mom that has a personality disorder and she's never going to change. And she's always going to have that and she's not going to get help for it. This is who she is. Do you want a relationship with her? And if you do, could you do it in a way that doesn't cost you your mental health? And maybe those boundaries are a little less than cutting her off.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I know for for us, I feel like the hardest part is doing the work and going to therapy and sitting with your problems and talking about your past and doing the homework and the meditations and the journaling and all of this stuff that comes with therapy. And then being 5 seconds with people that aren't also in therapy and then going right
Just,
back to
it's
where
just
you
like,
started.
great. And there goes all that work out the window.
All that work,
And
all that journaling just did not mean anything. And
that
that's the hard part. I think like going back into that situation and not reverting because it's so easy
Mhm.
to revert and it's so easy to just go back to oh it's just always been like this or oh don't touch anything because then it's going to make it explode. And I think that's the hard part is not going back to the person that you used to be despite doing all of the work that it takes to grow.
Well, and that's kind of the basis of like family systems theory, right? Is like if you
Oh.
imagine your family system as a circle, and if you change part of that circle, if you take you out, it's now wonky, right? Like the circle's going to get
Mhm.
wonky. It's going to be uncomfortable. Nobody's going to want to sit in that. And so people want to fill in that circle. They want to do things to pull you back into your spot. You see this sometimes in addiction, where you'll have a family member who has addiction and then they go and get clean. And then the rest of the system
Mm.
starts to fall apart. And you're like, wait a second, I thought that if the addict got clean, the system would be healthier. No, because the system is usually also created around how they have been interacting with that addict, right? And so the same can be said when you start to change who you are and show up differently in your family dynamics. People might start to get a little weird. People might start to treat you a little differently. They might not like it because now you're being different with them and they're not used to the same system that you've been having this whole time. It happens a lot
Yes.
with boundaries, right? Or even in relationships, if you start to learn that you can express your needs and you start to ask for things in a way that you've never asked for things before, people in your life might start being like, why are you asking for stuff, right? And they want to keep it the same way where they just get and they don't give. And so I think it can be challenging for a lot of clients because then they're like, all my relationships are starting to be hard now. Why is everything starting to be hard when you're changing how you're showing up?
Well, I think that that's something like so, I mean, for me, a misconception when I went into therapy was thinking that I'm going to go get help and my life is just going to be so beautiful now. But it's so much time of uncomfortable situations where like you have to do all these things that make not just you uncomfortable, but your family and the people around you. And then you start to feel like you're the outsider and and then you start to feel like, wait, am I doing the right thing? Because this doesn't feel right. This feels worse than how I felt before. So then it's like the moments where you want to revert back because
Hmm.
it's so
It's more
hard to,
comfortable.
yeah, it's more comfortable to just go back to like, oh, if I just give in, it'll be fine because like, I think I talked to Miranda about how like sometimes for me, like Sunday dinners, like I don't like going to Sunday dinners because Sundays are my day of rest. And if I don't get to rest, then it just throws me off my whole week. But then I'm sitting at home being like, oh, I hope my parents aren't mad at me because I did. And then I have
Yeah.
anxiety the whole day. And I'm like, so I didn't actually get to rest because, now I have all this anxiety. And so I'm not even making my life any better. It's like those feelings of like, when is it going to get better?
That's where it's hard, Evelyn, right? Is like you set the boundary of I'm not going to go. And then you have to keep doing it over and over again and helping yourself learn to relax and sit and be, and it
Hmm.
takes time. It's not, you just can't. I've lost clients
Yeah.
who are like, what happens when you just set one boundary and somebody doesn't respect it? And I'm like, oh, you don't get to just do it once. That's the hard part.
Yeah. It's,
You gotta keep, unless it's like a really like, you can never call me this or, game over boundary. Like for most people, you have to keep having those conversations. People are like, it's hard enough to have the first one. I'm like, yeah. And then you got to keep doing it over
hmm.
and over
Yeah.
and over again because
Yes.
people don't want to change the system.
Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, that is so true. I feel like people say that doing something hard the first time is like the hardest time, but I don't think that's true. I think it's hard every single time because I've had instances where, I've put up boundaries and yeah, they're respected for like a day and then it all goes back to being the way that it was. And for me, it's harder to bring it up the second time. It's like, okay, I've already talked about it, but they're not understanding. And I feel like something that comes up for me that is super hard is that generational aspect piece of, well, it's just been done for so long. Like, am I going to really be the one to change it? And I start kind of getting in my head of like, you know, this system is just so broken and so much trauma is going on that it's like, am I really going to be the one to take on that load of making people change and unlearn these things? But it kind of gets to the point where it's like, okay, something has to happen. Like something has to change because this is not sustainable. But in reality, for the other person, this toxic dynamic is sustainable because it's just all that they've known. So kind of getting into that, if I just say it once, it's going to just go in one ear and out the other and nothing's going to happen. But maybe, yeah, if I keep doing it, it'll change. But finding that within me of really showing up for myself and saying it so many times until they understand it and do it, that aspect is just so hard for me.
Well, that's the piece, right? Is it's so uncomfortable and it's so hard and you don't want to upset other people. But at what point do you start to value your own experience as much as you value their experience, right? And so it's hard to make other people upset or to keep pointing out things that make them uncomfortable. But that's where it really comes back to like, you're also having this experience. You deserve to also feel comfortable and heard and seen or respected or whatever it is that need is that you're expressing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in our culture, there's a lot of like, well, I had it worse than you, or my parents had it worse than you. So, like, you're not that bad, or like you're lucky to be, just a little bit traumatized, because compared to what I went through, I was ultra traumatized, but I think that's something that I know Miranda and I have really been working on, is just being like, no, I deserve a better life. I deserve to be happy too. And this doesn't make me happy. And I'm sorry that I'm making you uncomfortable. But like, and I think for me personally, it was like going to therapy after having my son and just feeling like, why do I even want help? Like, we've been living like this for so long. What's even the point? Like, we've just been going along like this and I'm still alive. So, like, let's just keep doing this because, I never thought there would be a life where I can actually break through a little bit of that generational trauma. But having kids and being like, I don't want this for them was really the push that I needed. But unfortunately, like, I can't just help them. I have to help myself, because if I don't change, then I'm never going to be able to, like, and something that like we talk about a lot is like when we have dynamics for family members and things happen, and I'm like, oh, I don't want my kids to think that this is normal, that this is a normal dynamic, because even though I tell them it's not normal, if they're living it, they're eventually going to be like, oh yeah, like that's normal.
Right. It's walking the walk, right? I tell people all the time, because some parents, not all parents, some parents have this idea where they're like, I can do this because I'm the adult, but I don't want you to do what I'm doing. And I'm
Oh,
like, they learn what you do. They pick up every single thing you say. Kids are amazing. They can literally read your feelings. They're like, I don't know, they got
hmm,
like this weird sixth sense when they're little. They
yeah.
can pick up on everything that you feel, right? And so just being aware that whatever you're putting out there by your words, by your actions, even by your own emotions, they're picking up on all of that all of the time and processing that in their own way, in whatever capacity they can process it. So you might do something and say, hey, mom did that, but it's not okay for you to do that. But they might have already processed it as that's what mom does, that's what I'm going to do. And you have no, like,
Hmm.
those words aren't going to mean anything.
Focusing a little bit on that aspect of like people working on all of this in therapy, and obviously you see this a billion times a day. So how would you say you measure progress in therapy?
A lot of times clients come in for a specific issue. Some of them are experiencing depression, some of them are having anxiety, some of them are switching from college to getting their first big kid job, and how do they have a life work balance kind of situation, new moms, whatever the situation is. And sometimes they just want to work through the thing. And then they're like, okay, I'm feeling better. I can cut back. Instead of doing weekly, we can do every other week. Or I feel like I've got the situation under control. Maybe we just check in. Some people are a little hesitant to cut it off right away, but some people do pretty well. And it's like, you guys are good. You have the skill set. Go forth in the world, see how it goes. If you need to, you can come back. And there are some clients who are happy to stay and do weekly therapy and continue to work on all the things for quite a while. So it just really depends on the client and their goals, and just making sure, again, it's that open communication of what are we doing here? How are you feeling about this? What are you getting out of this kind of situation? And making sure everybody's on the same page about what we're doing in this room at this point.
I had just have a comment, because I know for me, I've been going to therapy for a really long time, and there will be moments where I'm like, I'm so good. I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to conquer it. And then like 3 weeks in, I'm like, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. All this anxiety is back. My depression is back. And I think I'm so brave and I think I'm so capable. And then I feel like that dreadful moment where I like, oh my God, I need to go back to therapy, but I don't want to, because I thought that I was better than this. And so then I have to kind of, be with myself and be like, okay, do I really need help? And then I go back to therapy and then I'm crying because I'm like, I don't want to be here. I thought that I was cured. And, but then I kind of look at my life, and I remember one time I told my sister, like, oh my God, I don't want to go back to therapy. Like I feel like I was finally doing like good. And then she's like, you had a baby. Like, of course you need yes, it's been a year and you were doing good, but this big thing happened in your life. Like, so, what do you tell clients who sometimes are a little hesitant to come back because they feel like this is just never going to end?
Well, I think all of life is moving forward no matter what. And like, whether it's going home and working on homework and being like, yeah, I nailed it this week, and then having a bad week next week, right? Like, if you need to pop back in for a little tune up, for a little, like I need a couple weeks of this or a couple months of this or a year of this, and then I'm good again, right? I think it's just about listening to what your needs are all of the time. Because in the end, the focus that I think we lose is it is about us and our experience, and how are we healthy. And
Mhm.
sometimes we need to check in and go to therapy, and sometimes we don't. And sometimes we need it for a little bit of time or a longer amount of time, right? But I think it's just really valuing your own experience, and that there is no shame in using your resources, whatever those look like, right? And therapy is just another tool, another resource for you to manage your experiences.
Would you say that therapy is lifelong, or do people just learn how to cope or how to kind of heal themselves?
I think it just kind of depends on the issue, right? So, like, I've had kids in middle school who had like really bad OCD stuff and they worked through it and then they were good and then they went off on their own and I never heard from them again because they came in for this very specific set of stuff that they were working on and then I don't know what happened. They could have gone and seen another therapist. I don't know. But I think it just really depends on I think if you just imagine therapy as a tool. And if you need it, you need it. And if you don't, you don't. And you can use it for any and everything. You can use it for your relationships. You can use it for managing depression or anxiety. You can use it when you have new life circumstances. I've had clients who just pop in one time out of 3 years who are like, I'm switching jobs. I just need to make sure that I got all this and I'm doing this in a healthy way. I just want to check in, and then they go back out and they do their own thing. So I think it's just depends on the person and the situation.
Never thought about therapy that way of like, well, you can just kind of use it whenever you want or, contact me once a year or something. For me, the way I learned about therapy was like, okay, you have to go every week and every week you have to have like something traumatic to talk about and you have to like cry. If you don't
Yeah.
cry, it's not working. Like it was much more of like regimented than the way that you described therapy. I know for me, it was really hard to get to a place where I could be honest with my therapist. Cause it's like, okay, I can't be honest in any other aspect of my life. So why am I going to be honest with a stranger that I don't know? Like, she's going to judge me? I don't know if she's going to judge me. For me, it was really hard to get into that kind of groove of like, okay, I'm going to be honest with her and I'm going to like work on my stuff. And I remember the first time I was super honest with her and I just like started sobbing and she's like, yeah, it sounds like this has been building up for a while. I knew that she knew like, you're just acting like there's nothing going on, but you have a lot going on. And I know that the first time for me when Evelyn and I called it like graduating, like we graduated from one therapy session to only like twice a month or once a
Yeah.
month. Like we've graduated and we've grown. And I know that that's like a huge accomplishment, but then like that kind of toll that it takes on you when they're like, okay, I think you should come back to like once a week. I remember for me that was like, why?
Mhm.
I was doing so good. Like why are you like taking away my graduation?
Well, and I'm curious too, right? If there's still that underlying, like, if I go to therapy, that means there's something wrong with me. It means that I'm not doing well, right? And
There
again,
is,
I
I
think it's
think that carries
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
life. You're right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so just being
I
able to
mean,
recognize, like, it's just a tool, right? Like, it's not a reflection of like, you're not doing something, you're
mhm.
not enough, right? Like, being careful of whatever narrative that's feeding into for you. That it's just, I value myself and I know this helps me be more grounded, be healthier, be able to show up for my kids in a better way, right?
Mhm.
And so right now, I feel like I need a little bit more of that than I had 6 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for me, that definitely like has carried on that feeling of like I only go to therapy if I'm really messed up.
Mhm.
And for me, that has been really hard to kind of get out of because I I was viewing therapy as like, okay, I need to really just always dig deep and always work on myself and like always go in with a plan. And in the recent months have been kind of going into therapy. I was one of those people that I would think about, okay, what am I going to talk about today? Like, what am I going to go in and talk about? Or else I was anxious that I wasn't going to have anything to say. So I kind of in the last months have been trying to go into therapy, like not planning it out, just like, okay, well, like whatever comes up, like I'll talk about it. And in the recent months, like they've been super surface level. Like it's just been like school stress or stuff like that. Like it hasn't really been digging deep. And my therapist, she's been chilling. Like, yeah, we've been having conversations. And this last time that I saw her, as soon as I logged in, I was just like sobbing. And I could see in her face, she was like, oh my God. like I was thinking of just like a maintenance kind of therapy session. This is the digging deep. But that's kind of like the reality of what I'm taking into therapy now. Like not viewing it as like I messed up, I need to work on myself, and more of like, okay, I'm just gonna talk about what comes up. And like if something triggers me in the week, like I'll bring it up. Or if something has been hard, like I'll bring it up, but not viewing it as, okay, I am just really messed up and I need to fix it.
I think that's wonderful, and I kinda like when clients can kinda get past their emergent situation too, because a lot of times there's like, "Ah, there's the crisis thing that's happening right now," and then when they come in and they're in a little more settled place, and it's like, "Okay, so, alright, Miranda, let's start talking about those dynamics with your mom now. Like, now that we
Mm.
have the space to do
Yeah.
it, and now that you're not in
Mhm.
crisis anymore, let's really kind of go back to how you're communicating or how you're setting up those boundaries, right? Like it's nice to kind of be able to come back to like, okay, now that we're not in the crisis anymore, what are the other things that we're really trying to build the foundation of?
Yeah, I think another scary part, I think for anyone who hasn't tried therapy and is like kind of on the fence is the opening the floodgates and being like, I've spent
Yeah.
so much time not talking about this and not letting it affect my life that if I open those floodgates, I don't know where I'm going to end up. And I think just us growing up with so much generational trauma, actually being honest with my therapist and opening up those floodgates and being so raw and then having to go back to my real life exactly as it is just something that is really difficult.
I imagine it's very, very scary too. Like you've been holding on to it for so long and then you open it up and it's not even just like you allowing that emotion to come forward, but now somebody else has seen it.
Yeah.
Somebody else has witnessed the secrets and the shame and all the stuff.
Yeah.
And then you just leave and you're like,
Now
I am
what?
overwhelmed. What are they thinking? How am I going to face this person again? Right? Like it can be pretty intense, especially when you do it at first. And so sometimes therapists will slow clients down a little bit. Like, hey, we're getting into some pretty big stuff, and we only got like
Mhm.
15 minutes left, and
Yeah.
and sometimes clients can be a little upset about it, and they're just be like, well,
Mhm.
but I'm opening up, and it's like, yes. You got to be able to leave here. And I
Yeah.
know it feels good to share, but like, I got to make sure you're going to function the second you leave here too.
Yeah.
So I think it can be a little bit of a delicate balance too, because you want to give people that safe space, but you also don't want to be like, okay, now turn around and go back to work on your lunch hour. Have
Yeah.
fun.
I'm so interested in from your point of view as a therapist. How does it feel for you to have someone, open up and tell you things that they've never talked about and they've never brought up and then they just leave? Like they're sobbing and talking about their traumatic
Ooh,
life and then they just go off into the world.
I think sometimes it's a little hard. I truly do care about my clients. So just as much as people want to interview therapists, right? Like we also get a say too in who we work with.
Mhm.
And I really do end up building a wonderful relationship with my clients and I care for them tremendously. And so when they do share big, hard, heavy things, like my heart truly goes out to them sometimes. Like they'll leave and I'll just like need a second, like, oh, that was tough. Like I am really feeling for that client, just kind of like allowing that space and using the therapy skills, right? Like sometimes I'll journal about it. Sometimes I'll seek
Mhm.
consultation about it. Sometimes I'll seek my own therapy about it, right? Depending on what's coming up for me. But also using my own skills if I do feel like I'm carrying somebody else's stuff.
And how do you, in situations like that, especially, I know that you're in private practice, so you get to kind of choose your own schedule. But for example, if you have like 8 back-to-back clients and they're all just sharing some traumatic stuff, how do you prevent burnout?
Again, doing therapy things, right?
Mhm.
So always making sure I have a good support system. Through years of doing therapy, I've really kind of learned my own warning signs that I'm not taking care of myself enough, or I am taking too much on, or I need to have better boundaries, or whatever that kind of looks like. So, like if I find myself thinking about my clients while I'm at home or while I'm doing things with my family, then I'm like, why am I having these intrusive client thoughts? Like, what is it about this client that I need to work on? And so that's why I said I'll do different levels of things depending on what I need. I'll seek process. I'll do my own therapy about my own personal stuff that might be coming up, but just being kind of aware when those things are happening. Also, making sure that I prioritize my time doing things that fulfill me. So I really enjoy getting out in nature, doing physical activity. So making sure those are always part of my routine and then taking vacations. So
Mm.
I plan out my vacations throughout the year, making sure that I have regular scheduled time off where I leave a backup therapist and I truly walk away from my job in that moment. And I don't have any responsibilities related to work. And I just get to go be in my life and kind of settle back down into myself.
What's a backup therapist?
Because I will not be accessible, right? Whether I'll be out of state or I can't communicate or I want the time off, I will ask another one of my therapist colleagues to serve as my backup therapist. So in that event, all of my emails will go out saying, like Jennifer Lord is out of the office from this date to this date. If you need to speak to a therapist, here's information for another
Mm.
therapist you can contact. Here's information if you're in an emergency, things like that. And then the same on my voicemail will state that I am out of the office. Here are your resources. And so then I have another therapist who would know like, "Hey, I'm gonna be on vacation from this day to this day. If my clients call you, are you willing to see them or take them on or assess them?" And she's
Mm.
always willing to do that. So I have a buddy system with another therapist in
Oh,
my
that's
office,
good.
and we share vacation so that we can both take our time off through like maternity leave, or I had another colleague
Oh.
who had a medical leave. and had a family situation. And so we will all share those. I saw somebody else that she was the one with the medical situation was out for 3 months. And so I ended
Oh,
up taking
wow.
on a couple of her clients while she was going through that whole process until she was able to return. And
Oh,
so just also using like your community to make sure that no matter what, clients are being held still.
yeah. So, going back into a little bit of the client therapist privilege here. So, I know that when I was going to therapy after, well, for a long time, but then also when I had my son and going through postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety and feeling like, if I'm honest about not being happy being a mom, they're gonna take my child away or they're gonna put me in jail or like how, they're not gonna understand me feeling like this is not the happiest moment of my life and being afraid to be honest with my therapist. So what do you tell clients or what would you tell people who want to seek therapy but they feel scared to because they're scared that maybe something bad will happen if they confide in their therapist?
I think asking those questions. So, like, I always preface with my clients the very first time we meet, I always go over the limits of confidentiality, right? Harm to yourself, harm to others, consent if you want me to, talk to somebody else, any form of identifiable child abuse. There's a whole list of reasons why you would break confidentiality, right? And I always explain those to my clients, but I always leave the door open too. If there's something you want to talk about and you're not sure that I have to do something with it, throw an hypothetical my way.
Okay.
Hypothetically, if I said da 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 da, would you have to report me? And my clients will do that. Like, I'll have clients who
Okay.
are like, I don't want my parents to be reported. So let's say my parents did this thing. Would you have to report them? Right. And so I'm pretty honest with people because my goal is not to trap you into something, but it is to
Mhm.
keep you safe, right? And so having very open, honest conversations about that. And so I know that postpartum depression or even teenagers, right? I'll talk about the idea because I'll be like, have you ever thought about suicide? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay. But have you ever woke up one morning and didn't want to be there anymore? Or were kind of
Mhm.
disappointed you woke up? Like, right? So we can have
Yeah.
those conversations without it having to be, I have a plan, I have means. I want to be able to talk about that stuff because if they're keeping it to themselves, then it could escalate to those other things. And I want to know where they're truly at. And so I think the
Yeah.
same thing with postpartum depression, right? You're having a whole flood of feelings and they're all over the place. And some of them can even be violent or scary to you. And to not have a place to talk about it just feeds that even more. And so finding somebody where you're like, hey, I'm really struggling with this. What kind of things do you have to report? Or if I started talking about X, Y, and Z, is that reportable stuff? And just getting that information for yourself too, right? Because I might say, hey, I'm open to that. But another therapist might be like, oh my God, that freaked me out. Absolutely not. I am going to call
Yeah.
CPS.
Yeah, I think it's building that, trust with your therapist, and I think I had told you that when I was seeking therapy, like, I really wanted to for my therapist to be a woman, and a woman who spoke Spanish, and a woman, who I could see in person, and it was so hard to find, like, the right therapist, and then to go there and be like, "This motherhood thing is really kicking my butt, and it's not, anything that I imagined it was gonna be," and then being in a culture where all women ever want to be is moms and me being like, this
Mhm.
is not fulfilling for me and it's really hard. And, for coming from a culture where this is supposed to make me happy and it's not, is was very confusing.
So, just out of curiosity, was it better for you to have somebody from your culture in that experience?
Yes, 100%. I think for me, going to someone that understood me, someone who was from my culture, who's Mexican American, and there's just things that I didn't have to explain to her. There is just things that she just understood about my culture and about the situation that I was in. And I think as Miranda said, like I'm American. I was born in the United States, but my husband was born in Mexico. And so there was such a clash of cultures. And so being coming into a marriage and being like, yeah, you're not just gonna be, some man who's just there, coming home and you're gonna help me. You're gonna help me and you're gonna have to help me with the feedings and you're gonna have to help me with all these things. And then, going into like a family where they're like, oh, you're so lucky that your husband helps you, with your child. And I'm just like, I'm lucky that he helps me with his own child. Like this makes no sense. But I'm over here being a working mom and, still having to take care of my child and like the mental load of having to, make sure that the nanny's out there on time, making sure that I schedule and coordinate the nanny's schedule and there's food and that there's formula and being like, and still to this day feeling like, is this, I'm waiting for it to feel fulfilling. I'm waiting for that because it still feels hard. And I think for me, like, that's why I feel like so strongly, like, it's so important to go to therapy because if we just talk to, like, our own family about it, it's like, I think the number one thing I get when I try to talk to my family about it is like, "Oh, well, it goes by so fast, so just enjoy it." And it's like, I don't have time to enjoy it. Like like, I feel like it's like a fire coming towards me, and I'm trying to run as fast as I can, and I can't, you know? And it's like being like, I'm trying to enjoy it, but I can't because it's hard, and being like, "Okay, well, I want to enjoy it." So that's why I go to therapy. I go to therapy because I want to enjoy being a mom, but it's so hard, so I need to find, that balance.
Absolutely. And I love that you found somebody who is within your culture. And I think that that's really hard because not trying to make this political, but where we're at and access to grad school and programs like that is not
Yeah.
easy for everybody, and especially from different cultures, right? And so just the idea of finding somebody who understands what you're actually experiencing or can say like, this is how my mom is, and be like, "Yes, I get that,"
Yeah.
right? Like, I've lived that, can be so affirming and really wonderful, and I love that there are more and more therapists who are coming out and who are going through these programs, and I think that was another shift from the pandemic is the
Mhm.
real need for mental health services, and so I've seen a lot more people representing a lot more cultures that are coming out nowadays, which is really cool, but it's just sad that it does feel like it's so inaccessible for anyone who wants to follow this career path because we really do need a lot more support in the mental health realm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think Miranda, like, just like culturally, like being like a Mexican American therapist, like maybe families aren't so accepting of that. So it's like, even if you have the
Mhm.
means to go to college to be a therapist, it's like, what is your family going to think? Like, you taking a career in something that they don't even really believe in. They don't believe in mental health. So how are you going to work as a therapist? Like, that's not a real job, because people don't have mental health issues. So it's like, the culture, like being putting up apart from the financial barriers, it's like the culture barriers to pursue
Yeah.
those types of careers.
And I feel like also for in like that cultural aspect, being in school, like I remember when I was applying, I was telling my parents like, yeah, I'm applying to grad school. And I told them because I was going to need a lot of help because when I started my program, my daughter was only 2 months old when I started. And so I was going to night school. My mom had to help us with the baby while my husband was at work. And I remember telling her that I was going to grad school and she's like, oh, I'm like, what are you going to study? And I was like, oh, I'm going to be studying to be a marriage and family therapist. And at first she was like, okay, what is that? And I was like, it's a therapist. Like you go, people would go and, seek me out for therapy. And she understood it a little bit more. But I remember explaining that to my dad and he was like, and is that like a good job? And for our parents, it's like, okay, if you're not a doctor, a lawyer, or something of that sorts, it's like whatever you're doing good, like is that going to make you money? And I remember for me, that was really hard. Like even to this day, it's really hard because other people don't understand how difficult this really is. Like, yeah, I'm not studying to be a lawyer, but this is also really hard. Like you're learning how to hold people's darkest moments. And it's so hard to learn how to like, have empathy for people and how to actively listen. Like one of my really hard things that I have to work on is because in my school we do like training groups. So we get into like a little group of 5 and like we basically do therapy on each other and with a trained marriage and family therapist. And one of the really hard things that I had to learn was actively listen to people and not listen to think about how I'm going to respond to them. And that's something that I had to unlearn from our family. Because in our family, if you don't make your voice heard, no one's listening to you. Like you have to fight to get a word in. You have to like fight for people to listen to you. So for me, that was really hard. And like people don't understand all of the background things that goes into getting your licensure. And that has been really difficult for me. And I imagine for people of other cultures, like it's really disheartening. Like people don't take it as seriously because you're not becoming a doctor and you're not becoming a lawyer. Like it's not seen as seriously as other professions. But in reality, like mental health is severely underfunded, severely underrepresented, and there's such a need for it. And I'm one of those people that I recommend therapy to everybody. Everybody can
Yeah,
go to
me
therapy
too.
and it'll help. Like anytime someone tells me something like this has been really hard. I'm like, do you have a therapist? Like maybe you should look into getting a therapist. But then it goes into that idea of like maybe they can't afford it. Maybe their
Mhm.
health provider only covers a portion of it and they can't afford the
Mhm.
rest. Maybe they don't even have insurance, so they have to pay for it all out of pocket. Like in some instances, it's so inaccessible that it really starts to get people thinking like, yeah, this is something that's so important. It's something that there's such a need for it. But on the other hand, there's so many barriers. It's so difficult to get past all of those barriers to seek therapy.
Well, and I think you speak to something along those same lines is that a lot of times therapy and psychiatry go hand in hand, right? So, like,
Mhm.
let's say you do find a therapist and let's say it's really working, but what you're struggling with is a chemical imbalance, right? And so there's a lot of therapy you can do, but you can only do therapy to a certain point when there's a true chemical imbalance happening inside your body and you need a psychiatrist. And those have become harder and harder and harder to find
Yeah.
for a lot of clients. And not just that, now there's a ton more than I've ever experienced in my life who are private practice only, who don't even take insurance. And that can be extremely costly. Like you think therapy is costly. Imagine you have like a doctor who's like, I'm a doctor, right? And they're
Mhm.
charging a lot. And they need to see you regularly because if you're starting meds, you might have a reaction, something might be going on, and they need to make sure that you're doing okay. So you're having your initial consultation and then you're having one a couple weeks later and a couple weeks later. And there's a lot of monitoring in the beginning of it. So even if you're struggling just to have somebody to talk to, then there's the whole medical situation where you're trying to get medication or try different medications, right? And that can be really inaccessible too. And that's been really challenging for a lot of people.
I know you're not a psychiatrist, but do you think, in your opinion, that like depression and anxiety are curable diseases, or do you think they're just something that people learn to manage?
I wasn't sure what you meant by curable originally, so I was thinking about this question. I have seen people who have life experiences that they grow and change from and no longer impact them the way that they used to. I have had clients who have taken anxiety meds their entire life and are in their 60s and still taking anxiety meds.
Mhm.
I have read research where you can take antidepressants for a couple of years and it can change your brain chemistry and then you no longer need them. I've seen all kinds of things across the board. So, yes and no, and everywhere in between. For
Yeah.
some people, it can be a real struggle that can be very lifelong and very hard to manage. And for other people, they can get through that piece in their life, or things or circumstances might change and they might no longer need that kind of help.
Yeah, I know for
Yeah.
me, I've been struggling. I've had depression my whole life, and I think I had mentioned to you that it was like I never knew that it was something that could be genetic. And so when I found that out, it really changed my perspective about it. But for me, like I've never wanted to take medication because I'm extremely afraid of it. And I've, my therapist and my doctor have, been telling me, to maybe try it, see if it and I'm like, I'm honestly so scared. I'm more scared of like what could happen than I'll just live like this. I don't have to be 100% okay, but I'm just scared of what could happen to me if I take medication. So I've always been opposed to it. But, for me, I've kind of come to the point in my life where I just have accepted that it's just something I have to manage and just something that I have to manage for the rest of my life. And I have to do the therapy and I have to do the work for the rest of my life. And kind of accepting that and coming away from it, I was like, it sucks. And, I read a really good book on addiction and it just said kind of that, like, it's not my fault, but it's something that's my responsibility. And so I have to manage it. And it's really hard because sometimes I'm like, oh, why me? It's like, it's so hard. But I just have to kind of accept, like, if I stop doing the things to manage it, then I'm going to be right back in that place. So I'm just going to stop seeing it with the lens of like, well, maybe in 5 years, I'll be better. So I just have to do the things now. I'm like, now I just accept maybe it's just something I have to manage for the rest of my life. And I just have to live accepting that.
And I think even just focusing on the day to day, right? And I have clients who are like, well, I don't want to make plans in the future because what if I still feel this way? And I'm like, anything can happen any day of the week.
Yeah.
So I think just keeping your expectations reasonable and just being like, okay, I know I'm here now. I know how I'm managing things now. And this is what works for me now. That could change in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. You stole my topic. I was gonna ask
Sorry.
I was gonna ask her about medication. Because I know when Evelyn's therapist suggested to her to go on medication, I know that that was a huge kinda like turnoff for you to therapy. I
Yeah.
remember it kinda put you in a position of like, if I don't do it, is she gonna be mad at me or is
Well,
she
I
gonna keep
stopped going
suggesting
for a
it?
while because I was like,
Yeah.
I don't, because I thought like, if this is the direction she wants to take me in, I don't want to go there. And
Yeah.
so I think I stopped going for a while. And then I kind of just went back to her and I was like, I don't want to explore medication right now. It's just not something I'm open to. And she was like, okay, well, if you're not ready, you're not ready. But I think she suggested it to me a couple of times and I was scared. And I still am scared. I've been very reluctant to it.
So you as a therapist, Jen, how would you go about suggesting medication or are you kind of wary on who you suggest to seek out medication?
If I think that medication might be a reasonable option for them to explore, I usually ask them how they feel about medication
Mhm.
first. And then even if they say, like, I'm really not interested in it, kind of freaks me out, sometimes I'll even suggest, like, go talk to a doctor, like, go talk to a psychiatrist, ask all the questions you want. You still don't have to take anything because at the end of the day, it is 100% your choice what you put in your body.
Mhm.
And so just get information, like, ask the questions you've never been, because, like, I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't answer all those questions, but you can ask them, what does it do? What kind of chemical is it? How does it interact with your brain? What kind of side effects could you have? Like, you can always go get more information if you're interested. And you still never even have to take medication. But there have been clients I've had where I've watched them lifelong really struggle. And I know they were anti medication. And it took us to a certain point where they were kind of questionable about the choices they were making. And I was like, it's getting a little dicey here. I know you're not interested in meds, but this would be the point I would recommend them if you did consider it. And they know we have a rapport, we've talked about it, and they know that I would
Mhm.
only say it if I felt that way, and I was like, "But it's your choice, and I'm leaving it at that, and I'm not gonna bring it up again, I'm not gonna pressure you into it, I'm just letting you know what I'm seeing."
Mhm.
What would be like a hypothetical situation or client? What would be something that would push you to suggest medication?
If I've seen a client for a while and they've struggled with something like, let's say, depression, and then they really get to a real deep, dark place where they're not functioning. There's real concern about like their health, and their ability to kind of manage the situation, and maybe having some intrusive type thoughts or things that are getting a little scary, right? As more than people don't like medication, people don't want to be put on a 5150. And
Yeah.
so when those
Mhm.
conversations start to come up, it's just like, I just need you to be aware of what your options are so that everybody's on the same page kind of situation.
Would it be appropriate for someone who has postpartum depression to explore the idea of an antidepressant, or is that more like specific to like hormones and like motherhood in general?
So, in the research that I have read, because a lot of times after you give birth, your hormones change, you're very depleted, things are kind of whacked out. There are antidepressants that are actually really great at evening out your hormone levels again in a way that kind of relieves the depression, the fogginess, the fatigue, all of that stuff. And so, I have seen where there is research where it can be really beneficial for, 9 months, 2 years after having a kid. I have a client who was already struggling with depression before she had her child and then had a very, very hard postpartum depression and got on medication. She didn't want to, but she ended up getting on medication. It was medication she could pump with, it was medication she was fine on. And then having her second child, she's still on it through this pregnancy. She's like, I wouldn't make it through this pregnancy if I didn't have this stuff. But then there's other clients who don't wanna be on anything, and that's totally fine too. So, I've seen it on both sides, but there is research that can support, like, just kind of evening out the hormone levels again. Just like when you get to, like, perimenopause and menopause, different antidepressants can really help you even out those hormone levels that are changing in your body so drastically.
Is it hard for a client to find to find the right medication for them? Like, do they often get it right the first time, or is there sometimes they need to explore multiple medications? That laugh made me
The
nervous.
challenge, the challenge. This day and age, there's been a lot of medication that has been used. So psychiatrists have kind of built up their practice too, and they've worked with clients, and there have been ones who have referred to like, oh, this usually works really well for this, or this usually works really well for that. Or if you have any family history of things, like
Mm,
my mom was on Zoloft and that worked great for her. My aunt was on
mhm.
Zoloft and that worked great for her. And they'll be like, well, do you want to try Zoloft, right? Uh,
Yeah.
because there is a genetic component to things.
Uh-huh.
Not that everybody works on the same meds that their family worked on, but that's a good place to start. But it can be really challenging, and I do let all of my clients know who wanna pursue medication that it is kind of a guessing game at first, right?
Mhm.
You're gonna go in, you're gonna get evaluated, make sure it is depression you're struggling with, make sure it's not bipolar, make sure it's not something else that's going on, right? Then once they kind of zero in, like, yes, you are depressed, then you have different classes of antidepressants that you're gonna explore. And you're gonna start one. And at first you might have side effects because your body's got to get used to it. So they start you out with a dose where you're just seeing if you're gonna react to it, period. You're gonna have headaches, you're
Okay.
gonna have nausea, it's gonna make you not
Mhm.
sleep, right? Then after your body gets used to it, then they start upping your dose to a more therapeutic dose where you would start to see improvement in mood. But we're talking 6 to 8 weeks. And so
Wow.
that can be
Wow.
really challenging for people
Yeah.
who are like, I feel like garbage, I'm ready for meds. And it's like, okay, well, we gotta find the right med. Then we gotta get it going, and then we gotta see if
Mhm.
it actually does anything. And then we're gonna wait a couple more weeks and up the dose and see if it does anything. And then that might not be the right med. Okay, start over. Find
Wow.
another med, do the whole
Wow.
process over again. And so for some clients, that can be really, really off putting really, really hard to do.
Wow, that's crazy. I didn't know that so much went into
That sounds, I
medication.
mean, and I think for me personally, my fear was going on medication, not feeling better and feeling defeated or
Yeah.
feeling worse, or going on a medication, feeling worse, and then being so scared about, like, I'm barely hanging off for dear life here where I am. So if I go on something that makes me feel worse, like, I'm not
Well, the
ready
cool
for
thing is
that.
if it did make you feel worse, you would just stop it and then you'd be like, "Okay, I'm back to
Yeah.
my normal bad."
Get back
Like,
to
give that a day or
normal
2 to
bad.
clear out. I'm back to my normal bad, right? But it is, and
Yeah,
I've
but
had clients who are worried that it's gonna make them not themselves, right? So, like, I have clients who are
mhm,
bipolar, who experience very high highs, very manic, very
mhm,
creative, outspoken, high energy moments, very low depressions, right? And they're like, "I'm worried that if I take something, it's gonna make me not me." Or even ADHD medication, right? Like, I have clients who
Yeah.
have really struggle with ADHD, and they're like, "I'm worried if I take this, it's gonna make me not me anymore. I'm not gonna have my feelings, or I'm not gonna be the person that I
yeah,
know I am." And so I just tell everybody, whether you decide to take meds or not, it's always your choice. If
yeah.
you take it and it helps and you wanna keep taking it, great. If you take something and you don't like it, then don't take it. If you take something for a while and you wanna try getting off it, get off it, right? Like, people have so much say, and they should have so much say in what they're taking and how they feel about it.
That's so interesting. On this topic of kind of like healing, and we've talked about different ways that someone can grow. We've talked therapy, we've talked journaling, meditation, medication. How would you say that healing looks like in real life? Because something that we talked a lot about on this podcast is that healing can be very ugly. Our healing journeys have been very ugly. They've been ups and downs and circles and fights. And it's not how I thought healing would feel like. I thought it would be like Evelyn gave the funniest thing of like a woman in a flowing dress running through a garden of flowers. Like that's how I thought healing would be. But in reality, it's not. Like it's a bear about to attack you and rip your face off. And
Yeah.
that's
Like
something that
chasing you.
like chasing. So how would you say healing really is? Like honestly.
Going through the process or getting to the end? Because I think it
Both.
could be any and all of the things, right? I
All
think
of it.
wading through those waters is really, really challenging. I think it is facing that bear, right? And wondering if it's going to rip your face off or not. And I think there are moments where it is running through the field and feeling free and like you can be yourself, right?
Mhm,
But it's like anything else in life, there's a balance and it doesn't erase whatever your experience is. And if there's trauma, it doesn't make the trauma disappear. And if you have hard relationships in your life, it doesn't make them magically better either, right? And so
mhm,
there's going to be really positive moments, right? Like you might struggle with setting boundaries and dealing with toxic extra family stuff. But at home with your kid, you might be able to have these amazing moments where you truly connect with your
Mm.
child in a way that nobody ever connected with you. So it could change throughout the day. But
Yeah.
ultimately, if you're thinking about your experience and you're valuing yourself, that's healing.
Yeah, I think something that has been really hard for me, not in therapy, but just as a person, has been not letting external factors affect how I show up for myself and how I show up for my family and my happiness. Because it's something that Evelyn and I have talked about so much that now, like, we have our own family. Like, we have a family that we come from, and we have our family. That's our husbands and our kids. And something that has been very, very difficult for me is saying, okay, even though I'm happy in my family, I'm happy with my daughter, I'm happy with my husband, I'm happy with school, with my job, like, even though I'm happy in all of that, outside factors like family fights and family dynamics and like toxically, like gossip circles, like I let all of that affect my mood, and it makes me show up in the spaces that I feel the most happy. I show up angry because I carry that, and I carry all of that anger, even though it's not mine. Like it's external things, and I still carry that within my day to day life. And I feel like for me, that has been so hard to unlearn. Like, even though something happens where, something makes me mad, I don't have to carry that with me, and I can just let it go, and I can just, bye. But it's so hard to actually put that in practice. Like that is so hard to just say, okay, I'm just not gonna think about it. And I'm just gonna, move on. I can't do that. I like think about it and I think about it and I think about it and I'm like, okay, like this isn't, I'm gonna carry this for the rest of my life and I'm just always gonna be mad about it. And in reality, like that's something that you work on like outside of therapy. That's something that is a day to day learning how to unlearn all of these things. So what advice would you give to someone that's unlearning these hard patterns and that's really stuck in it.
Sometimes even just breaking it down to like where you allow those things to take up space, right? So like let's
Mhm.
say you don't want the family you come from drama to infiltrate your house. Okay, so then your house is your boundary. You can rage in your car, you can go for a walk, you can do whatever, but the second you step through that threshold of your house, you're not allowed, right? So if you find your mind starting to wander, if you find yourself starting to get irritated, nope, write it on a piece of paper, go put it in your car, go put it outside, go whatever, right? It can live out there, but it can't come in here, right? So you can even just start making like physical things. One of the things I always did at work is I have my work clothes and I have my personal life clothes. And when I have my work clothes on, I'm in work mode.
Oh,
And then I
I
come
like
home
that.
and the first thing I do is I change because I am no longer in work mode. I am in home mode now and I'm in my other life, right? And so like it was just having those boundaries of like where does work live? Where do I live, right? And I think you can take those kind of same concepts with like big drama outside of your family and then your house, right? And like what do you allow in and what do you not allow in?
Well, I think the hard part is like, in therapy, you're in like whatever, if you go weekly, you're those 50 minutes with your therapist, but the actual work happens, most of the actual work happens when you leave therapy. And
Mhm.
I know my therapist will tell me to do things and I'm like, you're crazy. I'm not doing that, but then I have to go home and think like, well, now I'm stronger and I can think, well, if I don't do those things that she's assigning me to do, then what's the point of therapy? Because I'm here because I want to change and I want a better life. But if I don't do the things that she's suggesting, then I'm never going to get there. And I'm just going to keep going in circles. I think it took me years into my new therapist to actually be like, okay, I'm ready to actually do the work and I'm going to actually do the things. I'm sick of just going in circles and complaining about things that are happening. And I think for me, the hardest part was realizing that like I do hold control and that if I just stood up for myself, my life could be different and I could have a better life. But I have to do the change and like maybe realizing that like I'm the problem because can't say no and because I'm a people pleaser and I don't want to do the hard things to have a better life. But if I don't ever do it, then I'm just going to keep going, in circles.
And I think the hard part, it two pieces, right? So there's the do the thing. There's the action, like go home and tell your mom no, she can't come over on Saturdays anymore. That's your day with your family, right? But then there's all the underlying stuff. It's the relationship with your mom. It's the but she
Hmm.
helps out and
Mhm.
watches my kid. I can't alienate her. It's all the
Yeah.
other pieces that go with it, right? And so your therapist might say, "Go do this thing," and you're like, "Okay, but I feel like I should do the thing, or else why am I in therapy?" But there's also all the other pieces you have to come to terms with and to work out and to be okay with and to sit in. And for some people, it does take some amount of time and hearing that message over and over again and trying to figure out how that works in their head and their reality too. So,
Yeah.
like, I know you got to a point where you're like, well, what am I doing here? I'm just wasting my time. But as you're thinking about it, as you're going home on each of these days, at first you're like, no, I'm not going to do this. And then it's like,
Hmm.
okay, well, she tells me to do this, but if I did it, it would look like this, right? You're processing it in your own
Yeah.
way
Mhm.
until you're getting to a point where you do feel like you can take that step. And not everybody can take that step right away.
That's something that we're gonna actually gonna talk about it in another episode. But Evelyn and I, our therapists, do this technique. It's called brain spotting. And our therapist did that. And I remember at the beginning, I was like, this is so stupid. Like, what am I doing? Sitting here
Yeah.
staring at this thing. Like, that's literally it. She was
Yeah.
asking me, like, what's coming up for you? And in my mind, I was like, this is stupid. Like, what is this? And obviously I wasn't gonna say that, but I was just sitting there and once I got past that, like, I feel silly for doing this, it really worked for me. And I haven't done it recently because I've been virtually and I don't really see the benefits as much virtually than in person. But I remember I would sit there and I would process all of these things and she would just be like asking me questions. And I remember it kind of got to the point where I was really working through everything that she had ever told me in therapy and I wasn't listening to. Like it was all coming up in that moment. I was like thinking about all these things and I kind of got to the moment where I realized I know exactly what I have to do. Like I have to put boundaries. And it wasn't anything that the therapist said. It was just my brain processing everything that she had said before. And I was like, this is creepy. Like this is some magic voodoo thing. I was like, this is really creepy. And for like anyone that's listening and like look like you should look into brain spotting because it's something that I had never heard of before and I'm not really into like those alternate technique kind of things but after that I really was thinking about it and I felt like dizzy. I felt lightheaded. I was like, what did this lady just do to me? And I I think that was the moment where for me, there was a huge shift in the way that I viewed therapy as it's really me. Like, I'm the one driving this car. Like, it's not the therapist. She's not the one telling me where to go. Like, it's me. I'm the one that's driving this. And if I want to get something out of it, I have to be the one to get to that destination. No one's going to push me and no one's going to do it for me. And that shift in mentality was really hard for me. And it was really hard to put the weight on myself instead of putting the weight on the therapist. Like, if I'm not getting better, it's because the therapist isn't doing their job right. But in reality, it's me. I'm not doing my job right. And I need to start prioritizing myself. So this idea of just that healing is just so painful. It's true. Like in reality, I mean, for me, we'll get into what you think about it. But for me, like, I think healing is very painful. And I'm kind of interested for you, like with your clients, or like, what is the usual reaction you get to healing? Is it usually like people kind of take it on as like, this is really hurting me? Or do people kind of see it as this is opening my eyes to something that I had never seen before?
I think I kind of get a mix of reactions, right? Like some of them do amazing things with taking that space to hold the child version of you, right? And do some
Mm,
really repairing, loving, kind things to the child that you hold inside of you. And some of those moments are beautiful and that can feel really good. And then there's other moments where you're coming face to face with some pretty dark stuff and that truth can be extremely painful. And, there's everything in between. And then, like I said, I think healing really is a mix of where you have to face the dark stuff or you have to do the hard things. And then you do have those moments of like, wow, I really do have the power within me to make this a different
mhm.
situation, or I don't have to live like this, or I don't have to continue to put myself in these types of relationships or dynamics
Yeah.
anymore. And so I think it really can be hard to face that stuff and to take that ownership. But I do think there is also this beautiful piece of recognizing like how much control you really can have in those situations.
Yeah, well, it's scary to go like to therapy and kind of I think for me, like one of the biggest eye opener moments was like, I'm not a child anymore. I'm an adult and I have control. I
Mm.
have the ability to change my life. And I always joke with Miranda about it. Like when I go places and people want to insult my parenting style, and I'm like, okay, bye, grab my kids and I go to my house. I'm like, I don't have to put up with this. Like, I have a car, I have a home, loving home I can go home to. I don't have to put up with this. And it's like kind of that mix between still being a daughter of, Mexican parents, but then also being a mom of American children who it's like, okay, I want to show them a better life. And I think that like in our journey and when we've been trying to kind of heal and mend the relationship with our parents, but realizing that there is just a wall of like, they're never going to change. They are who they are. And we just have to figure out a way to have a healthy relationship with them,
Mhm.
which means maybe it's not going to be a close relationship. Maybe it's not the relationship I would have hoped that I would have with them, but it's like, but I can't give. I can't give it all, like I can't heal and give my all to them. It's not possible. And so it's so scary because, being a child of Mexican household, it's like you do what you're told. You don't talk back, you don't stand up for yourself, you just take it. And so it's really scary to kind of come to that realization like, but I'm not a child anymore. I can stand up for myself. I can ask for what I need. And maybe they're not going to receive it in a very good way, but I can't feel bad about that.
I think it is really challenging, right? Like to set those boundaries and to ask for what you need. And then maybe you don't get what you need and then having to do it for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Being like, okay, but I can take care of me, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I gave him a shot. Maybe I'll give him another shot again
Yeah.
later, but I'm going to have to do this part. And sometimes that can feel very daunting for a lot of people, right? Like I have to process this and I have to set the boundaries and now I have to do the thing too. Like
Yeah.
just a lot of work.
And I
Well,
think
it is
from
a
this,
lot of work.
yeah, and going into like something that has been really, really prevalent in our lives is coping. And Evelyn and I have different ways of coping, but for example, I've talked about on the podcast I have a really bad relationship with food. And that ever since I was little, it was my way to cope. And it was like growing up in a Mexican household, like that's how people showed love is like, oh, I love you, so I'm gonna make you your favorite food. Or, oh, I thought of you, so I made you this. And that was just the way that we felt love. And it's the way as an adult something that would make me feel better. Like, yeah, after a long day where I had a horrible day, I'm gonna get some Wingstop and I'm gonna be happy. Like,
Yeah.
like that's gonna make me happy. And it's something that I've slowly had to unlearn. And it's something that I've had to come to the realization that actually that's not that healthy. Like, that's actually not the way that I should be making myself feel better all the time. Like, yeah, once in a while, whatever. But if I'm doing it all the time to distract from something that I don't want to confront, that's where the problem is. And it goes into another burning question that we have for you is why do self-destructive behaviors like binge eating and compulsive spending and compulsive lying,
Mm.
how do those often show up when you have emotional distress?
Well, I think there's kind of 2 parts to it, right? So there's the ones that you learn, just like everything else that you learn, right? Like there's coping skills that you learn from when you're younger to help yourself feel better, right? So a lot of times you fall into, and unfortunately food also relates to your culture and control, right?
Mhm.
Because you can control what you put into your body and what you take out of your body and how you manage all of that, right? But there are a lot of people who use a lot of negative coping skills or harmful coping skills, less than healthy coping skills, right? That we develop as kids because as kids you only have so many resources, right? And you can only do so much. And so you tend to fall back on these very primitive coping skills, so to speak. And that's what you get used to. And so then that becomes very easy to fall back into during times of distress, right? Because those are your go-tos. You've had them your whole life. But also there is a real sense of I feel like garbage and I want a dopamine hit, right? Like I want to go
Mhm.
do spending. I want to
Yeah.
go do something exciting. Like I'm looking for a boost here because I feel like garbage. And so also just being kind of aware of what's healthy and what's not healthy for yourself. And yeah, recognizing when you're falling into a pattern of like, okay, I've had Wingstop 3 times this week. Maybe I need to check myself and just be like, am I good? Is something going
Mhm.
on? Do I need to be
Yeah.
doing something else? Right. And just see like, is that how you want to continue to handle that?
And it's so funny with things like, because I love this financial show. It's called Financial Audit, and I love that show, and I watch it all the time. And all of these people come on talking about how, they were never taught how to manage money. Like, it was never a conversation. Like, we talked about in another episode how finances are super taboo and how, money isn't talked about. And these people talk about how they learned as kids that, as money can go, money can come. Like, if you spend your money, you just earn more money. And it's something that is seen as so normal. Like, this idea of, oh, I'm just going to spend my whole paycheck, or I'm going to, eat whatever I want whenever I want because it'll make me feel better. Or I'm just going to lie about something so I don't have to face it. And it's something that is so normalized, and it's so hard to get to that point where you start to understand, actually, that's not that healthy. And that maybe that's something that you should have to change, like, you should work on. So as a therapist, like, how do you kind of pick out, like, yeah, this is kind of problematic behavior, or, maybe this isn't causing them that much harm?
I usually invite conversation, right? So be like, all right, Miranda, you've been eating Wingstop every day for this week. Like, how you feeling about that? Like, does that work
Mhm.
for you? Is that something you want to change? Do you feel like that's a good choice for you, right? Or you're blowing your paycheck every time. Is that okay for you? Do you want to continue on that path, right? Because you also have to remember whatever I think is healthy or unhealthy, like I can say like that might not be healthy, but if you feel like what you're doing is fine and you don't want my input on it, you're not going to want to change it and you're not going to
Mm.
like what I have to say, right?
Mm.
And so I'm always also trying to remember like it's not about me. It's not about what I think all the time, right? I have the knowledge that I can bring and I can share things to my with my clients. But at the end of the day, it's about my clients and their experience and what they want to get out of it and what they want to talk about and what they want to work on. I only know what people bring to me. You could be going and doing couples therapy with somebody else and coming in here and telling me how you are with your husband and how he's basically the whole reason you're in couples therapy because he's horrible and he's doing this and he's doing that. And I might never hear the part where you're doing all the horrible things to him because I only
Mm.
know what you bring to me.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, that's difficult. So, what do you think the therapy is beneficial for young kids, even if they didn't have anything traumatic happen? I mean, for myself, I am extremely terrified of messing up my kids. Like, I live with that fear in my every single day, every moment of every single. I'm like, I don't know in what moment I'm gonna do something to them that's gonna just haunt them for the rest of their life. And so, coming from a culture that, we don't really talk about our feelings, but we don't talk about, how our parents messed up. And also coming from a family that has addiction and depression, it's like, are we supposed to only seek it out for them if they're showing signs of distress or for depression? Or do you think that therapy is beneficial for kids just like it's beneficial for adults?
Well, I think as parents, you can always give your kids language. You can talk to them about feelings. You can model, healthy behaviors and communication styles. But typically, we don't tend to see kids unless there's a thing that comes up. They're being bullied. They're struggling making friends at
Mm.
school. They're experiencing depression. They're struggling with, they need coping skills to manage their ADHD, right? So that's usually when we'd see them. But I
Mhm.
mean, I've seen kids in their teenage years who have very, very, very open relationships with their parents, tell their parents everything. And their parents are like, I don't know how to respond, or I don't know how to handle this, or I don't have the coping skills for this.
Mm.
Even though we are a very open family, we know everything, we just need another resource to kind of help us guide our kid. So I
Okay.
think it just depends on the kid, but I think there's usually like a goal, right? Like there's usually like a reason you would bring them, something you're trying to achieve when you go to therapy.
I'm the same as Evelyn. I'm like, I don't want to mess my kids up.
Yeah.
That is my fear. Like, I don't want to be the reason they go to therapy. Like, they probably will, but I'm going to be the main factor, you know? And it's something that I have been thinking a lot about because I just recently had a class on addiction. And specifically, we talked about addiction with teenagers and how a lot of the times, like, kids are doing drugs and like sometimes their parents really just don't know. We talked about vapes and how vapes come in like all different, like some look like gummy bears, some look like they can look like anything. And as a parent, you could see it and you don't know that that's a vape. And we talked about in that class how sometimes parents of teenagers, younger kids, put their kids in therapy so that if there is something that's going on that they can't talk about with them, they'll talk about it with their therapist. And maybe something isn't like specifically wrong, but it's my professor used the word, like, preventative therapy, like, so that something doesn't end up being, like, super bad because they're already in therapy and they already have someone to talk about it. So, like, it doesn't get to the point where the parent sees, "Oh, my kid really, like, needs help." Instead, it's like, "Oh, like, if something comes up, you talk about it with the therapist." And that's something that I've been thinking about as, like, my kids grow up. Maybe that's something I would explore, like, if there's something that they can't talk about with me, like, I would want them to have someone. So as a therapist, what do you think about putting your kids in, like, preventative therapy?
Well, and I've had kids whose parents know they're gonna get a divorce or know things are gonna be in the future,
Mm.
or who
Oh,
just wanna
okay.
establish a relationship first and not wait for the big thing to come up next, right? Because kids, just like adults, right, like, want to have that trust, want to feel connected to whoever they're gonna talk to. Kid no, inherently, you're going to be an adult no matter what. As a therapist, you are going to be over the age of 18. So when this kid comes through that door, they're gonna view you as another adult, right?
Mhm.
Who's going
Mhm.
to judge them and tell their parents everything and all of these things, right? And so I have had parents where they're like, "Hey, I think we're heading down the road of divorce. Do you mind like establishing a relationship with this kid first, and then
Mhm.
if we need you later, we can call on you." So at least they know they have somebody. And so I have had parents who want to kind of establish like, I just want them to have a safe place, get to know you a little bit, do some sessions, build a relationship, and then if we need you in the future, then we'll come and use that situation.
I
Oh,
love
that's
that.
so
That's
interesting. I
smart.
never thought about that. That's like the same way, like you said, using therapy as a tool. Like it's not
Yeah.
specifically when you're in crisis, but it's something that you can use just even when, things are good. Like you can always use someone to talk to. I feel like for me, and it goes to the same thing that you said, like sometimes I think twice about telling someone something because it's like, are they going to go tell someone else? Like, are they going to judge me? Are they going to say something to me that's going to hurt my feelings? But I feel like with a therapist, like that, once you build rapport, like that really isn't there because I know my experience being an adolescent in therapy, I every single session was like, I hate my parents and I want new parents and I want to like move out and I want to like that was every session. And I feel like having that space where I could tell someone that and I'm not worried like they're gonna go tell my parents that I told them that I hate them. Like I feel like that's so important, especially with adolescents. Like having just that one person that makes them feel heard and seen and reinforces that like they're a person, like not just because they're a minor means that they're not a person. Like we in our culture, it's like until you move out of my house, like I tell you what to do. And like you don't move out of this house until you get married. And then it's like, oh well then you have someone else telling you what to do. Like it's kind of that idea of like you never really get to feel that autonomy. And that's what I pull out of like what you've been saying is like people have autonomy and you have like the liberty to really be in control of your life, even if you don't think that you have that. Cause I struggle with that all the time. It's like, yeah, I'm just a 24-year-old minor that I do whatever my parents tell me to do. Like, That's just the reality. But I feel like what we've talked about today has definitely just shown me that we are really just the drivers of our own lives. And at the end of the day, a therapist is just someone else that is going to really be there for you and reinforce this idea of you are your own person. And however which way you get there, like you really are. And even if everyone is telling you that you're not, you are your own self outside of everything else that's going on.
I think one thing I heard in grad school that reminds me of what you're saying is that it's our job to just walk along the path with you as you go on your
Mm,
journey. We're not here to guide you, right? Like we're just here to be there with you no matter what path you choose.
Yeah, I think that's like the important takeaway from therapy as opposed to venting with people close to you. It's like they have your best interest at heart and they're there with you and not necessarily going to tell you what to do or not tell you what the right or wrong decision is, but build you up to make your own decisions and be stronger. Stand on your own 2 feet, by yourself. So I think something I struggle with a lot is making decisions because I grew up in a
mm.
household where we weren't allowed to make decisions and the decisions that we made they had to be pre-approved. And so it's like now being an adult and having to make my own decisions, I'm like, I don't know how to make decisions. Like it's really hard for me to make a decision for myself and sit with that. What if I made the right decision or what if I made the wrong decision? So it's like and now I think I understand like using my therapist as a tool because like when things get hard, I have that relationship with her now. So I don't have to go and start over with another therapist. Like I can, like you said, pop in and out when I need her and then not have to go like a commitment every week. And so I have this relationship with this person that I know is there for me and who has my best interest at heart.
Use your therapist as you need without feeling bad. Sometimes life
Yeah.
gets a little tough. Sometimes we have a bit of a harder time. Sometimes we need to go weekly. Sometimes we just need to check in, right? But to not judge yourself for whatever you need, to honor yourself for whatever you
Hmm.
need.
Yeah, I love it. Well, do you have anything else you want to add, Jennifer?
I think it's wonderful that you guys are putting this out there and spreading mental health awareness. And I also preach therapy to everybody. And if anybody is interested in looking at therapy, I think it's a wonderful idea for everybody to just get a chance to see what it's like. And it's not as scary as people seem to think it is. It's just one other person who's also probably a little nervous, like a first date, too. And,
Yeah,
everybody deserves to have the space where they can truly be themselves.
thank you. And are you
Beautiful.
accepting any new clients at this moment?
I kind of am a little bit.
You are? Okay,
Very,
just
very
if
limited
anyone.
availability.
Okay, well, if anyone's interested, we'll link Jennifer's information in the bio.
Just thank you so much for coming on. I think a really, really big thing we want to do with this podcast is just spread awareness and kind of just push people to think a little bit outside of what they're comfortable of. And as Evelyn and I have talked, like sometimes we talk about pretty provocative topics. Like we talk about finances, we talk about mental health, we talk about like family dynamics, we talk about trauma. We just did an episode on grief. And I think just being aware of everything that's out there, even if you're not comfortable now, being aware of all the resources. And there's so many people that will be out there to support you and be there for you and show you that you're just worthy of respect and love and just to be cared for.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jennifer. I think that just anyone out there listening, you are deserving of a beautiful life. And if you do the
Mhm.
work, you can get a beautiful life. And even though it's hard and you
Yes.
think that it's not possible for you because of your culture, your dynamic, or your situation, if you really do the work for yourself, and it might take years, but it's so worth it because if you start
Yes.
now, you'll be just that much closer to that. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here. And thanks everybody for listening. Make sure to like, follow, and give us a 5-star review if you're liking the podcast. Also, check out our Instagram. We share behind the scenes photos and updates after every episode. And if you're interested in being a guest, the link is in our caption. New episodes drop every Monday. See you next week on Choices Were Made. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer.